Welcome to another episode of the Ibn Abi Umar podcast. This is your host, Umar Osman. Got a great episode lined up for you today with my good friend, Adam Taufique, and we'll be reflecting on our experiences as Masjid board members. To stay connected with the podcast, please go to ibnabiomar.com, ibnabeeomar.com/podcast. You'll find all the episodes listed there, and if you go to ibnabiomar.com/newsletter, you can sign up for my email list, which is where I keep everyone updated on all the latest articles, podcasts, videos, projects, etc. So please make sure to check that out and subscribe. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast in iTunes. Those notes are those links are in the show notes in this episode. And with that, we'll get right to it. Welcome to another episode of the Ibn Abi Umar podcast. This is your host, Umar Osman. Got a great episode lined up for you today. Got my good friend Adam Taufique, and we'll be sharing our experiences as Masjid board members. Hope you enjoy the episode, and let's get right to it. All right, everyone. I'm here with Brother Adam Taufique.
Assalamu everyone.
From Debt Free Muslims. And we are both here in our respective capacities as retired Masjid board members.
Yep.
Me for a long stretch of 90 days.
And I was a 2-year stretch at Valley Ranch. I'll just mention the name, it's fine.
That's an official capacity, but we've also both... Actually, I think we also both are in the position that our dads were actually longtime board members.
And mine still is.
Still is.
Yep.
Mine's finally, we forced him to retire. I had to get him out of there.
That's my struggle right now, is forcing him to retire.
But, so we grew up in the family business, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we've been talking about doing this episode for quite a while.
Over a year.
Over a year. And our concern always kind of came down to, we don't want this to be too negative or pessimistic. And I'm not sure that we've completely solved that problem.
Yeah, probably won't.
But we'll hopefully not be ranting too much or venting. So this is kind of our therapy session. But let's kick it off. Let's get kind of some of the basics out of the way. Why did you join the board at your local masjid?
So the reason why I joined the board was essentially as cliche as it may sound, to fill a need. The former board at our community was a bunch of older uncles, especially the position I took over, which was treasurer. And so there was a huge need, especially the imams that we had, to have a younger presence in the community, to be part of the leadership, and to essentially help the imams essentially reach a different demographic for the community. I ran on a block with a bunch of other people who are younger and kind of like-minded to kind of bring the community forward, from the mom and pop shop that it was. So that was really the main motivation that I had to run for the position that I did.
So for me, it was more...
I was asked, what was your motivation?
I didn't want to, actually. Because I grew up seeing my dad on the board.
Yeah.
So, I can remember as far back as being like 9 or 10 and going to masjid construction meetings and things of that sort. So, I've been intimately familiar with what gets done and how it gets done. And I want no part of it. I've always been the type of person who I would rather, if there's something that I can volunteer to do, I'd rather just go do that. And I've shared this story before, like in the workshop quite a bit, is... there's always different dynamics in the community. And so a lot of times when I was the younger person, they'll be like, oh, we should involve younger people, that are active or coming or whatever. So they'd be like, oh, why don't you go handle like the Jummah rotation and invite the khatibs while we do the important stuff. Yeah. And I'm just sitting there thinking like, okay, this actually is the most important thing that you're putting on for the community. But sure, I'll, volunteer and do it. So my thing was always just try to volunteer and fill a gap or contribute where I can. But in terms of running for the actual board, I would say that was a lot more pressure, like parents or community or whatever, like people saying, oh no, it's about time to get involved. I had actually run before for president this was so before I actually was on the board. I'd run a couple of years prior to that, and the only reason that I ran was because I wanted to make sure that the masjid hired a good imam.
Okay.
Because they had an opening at that time. And so I ran, and like kind of reluctantly, I was like, I don't want to do this, but like maybe I can get this in place and I can peace out. And I remember the other person that was nominated started campaigning like crazy. Like he showed up at Jummah prayer one day and was like handing out flyers like, vote for me, vote for me, vote for me. And I was just like, oh my God. I'm like, and I was just kind of like, I don't want to do that. And this is this really weird dynamic in the masjid. So I was just kind of like, if you want it that bad, like you can have it. And so I withdrew. Because I'm not trying to be like self-righteous. I just want to do the work. I don't want to get caught up in all this other stuff around us. Like if you want to do it, that's fine, take it. But the second time around, it was kind of a similar thing where it's like, okay, we have a chance to like, bring someone in, establish something in the community. So that was why I ended up running. Yeah,
and that whole self-campaigning. I mean, at our community, we had a meet the candidates day or a night, and then each candidate will give like a 5-10 minute spiel as far as why they're fit. And I was very uncomfortable with that talk because I'm kind of in that same mindset where it's just give me the work to the task to do. I really have a hard time like building myself up, if you will.
Yeah.
That was just a very uncomfortable, and I think that's uncomfortable. I think if you're comfortable with that, then that's a red flag.
Yeah, this is really like that double-edged sword of if the person that's up there pumping themselves up, like vote for me, I'm awesome, I'm going to do a great job, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. That sets off alerts like there's something else going on here. But by the same token, because there's unqualified people running, you also want to sometimes get your foot in the door. So I don't know, it's hard. How did you balance that?
I just gave the shortest speech that I could and just talked about my experience with like the MSA and with the youth that I've dealt with in Birmingham. And that was essentially my platform, is that, hey, I've had experience connecting with young people. I've had experience, doing some sort of leadership in the community.
Yeah.
If you're happy with that experience that I've done, and I'm a heads down, get the work done type person, then vote for me. If not, then if there's other political aspirations that you have for other people in the community, then by all means. And to be honest, I'll be very. Even on the ballot, I never vote for myself.
Yeah, I didn't vote for myself either.
I either keep a blank or...
I actually told my family, I actually recruited my family to, come and vote for other people.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just, that was my whole thing. That's how I dealt with it. It's the shortest speech possible, and I just, if you're happy with that, then that's great. If not, then it does no difference to me if you vote for me or not.
So, this brings up a major issue that kind of goes with these things, and that's expectations going in, or even expectations as to why people run. And I'll maybe start on I don't want to say negative note, but I'll start with an observation, which is you never doubt anyone's intentions, right? Like you never want to say someone's being insincere in their heart, but there are certain actions that people do that don't indicate the best interest of the masjid or the community.
Fair enough.
And that for me was one of the biggest things, is that a lot of times people are running for the masjid, quote unquote, to serve the community. But then they also at the same time don't attend any masjid activities. I've even seen and these are obviously probably isolated. These are definitely not the norm. But I have seen people who actively run and serve on their board, and they'll prevent their kids from going to Islamic classes. Being no, you need to go to do XYZ instead. Don't do any they'll discourage their kids from religious pursuit while they're simultaneously serving in the masjid board. This kind of weirdo cognitive dissonance.
Yeah.
But have you seen, and you mentioned what masjid you were at, but you also have, we should mention in fairness, you have experience at a number of masajid in multiple cities actually, not just in Dallas, but even in other states. What dynamic have you seen in that regard?
I mean, I'll talk to me about myself personally. That I reached a stage in the middle of my board term where I had immense burnout, I had a lot of burnout from that job, because I mean I was the treasurer of the Masjid, and the treasurer essentially is a big bookkeeper for all the finances, and there's a lot of money counting and all that stuff going on involved. So I kind of fell in that trap where it was, we were spending 5, 6, 7 hours at the Masjid, the meetings, or I was there counting the money or whatever, and I kind of saw myself fall off as far as like attending like daily prayers or whatever.
Yeah.
I just saw that for myself, but I saw that for a lot of the board members where it was going for Fajr was a difficult task, or going for Isha at night was a difficult task.
Like it became more difficult because you were on the board. Exactly.
Because we our meetings were on Thursday night, and we would spend sometimes until 12, 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday morning, meeting. And then there was really no energy to get up for Fajr the next morning to actually go to the Masjid. You just go home, pray Fajr, and then go back to sleep. So that was a dynamic that I saw with our team. Now there were some people on our team that were dedicated, that would go to the Masjid every single day, and they were, they had that strength. But me personally, I had burnout.
It's like spiritual burnout in a sense.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think I probably had the same thing. I think during the time that I was on the board was probably a time that it felt uncomfortable going to the Masjid. And that's probably like a personal shortcoming, but the spiritual burnout is very, very real, because you get exhausted, like fighting for the littlest things.
Yeah.
I think that's so kind of on this idea of like how I expected it to be versus how it was. Everyone says that they've got the Masjid's best interest at heart. But one thing that I noticed was there was no unity around how do we define what's best for the community. Okay. And I don't think that a lot of people had either put thought into it or knew how to define it. And so, one issue that would happen is everyone's got a different definition of what they think the community needs, or what they think is best for and usually it's oriented on what that person's individual needs are. They'll project that onto the community.
It's very self-centric.
And for me, it was very exhausting trying to fight that battle of, you might think that all we need is X, Y, Z, but actually like the larger community needs a lot more. And so just those battles on trying to convince people that like the Masjid needs to do more, which might seem obvious, was a very difficult uphill battle.
Yeah. So from our experience, I mean, I guess what I expected it to be. I mean, I knew there were going to be meetings, and that was all, and kind of that steering the ship of the community was that. But I didn't understand, and so our thing was you don't run for position, you actually run for a board member, like a board member spot, and then when the board members are chosen by the community, then amongst the board they choose who the president, vice president, whatever is going to be. Yeah. So I kind of got tagged as a treasurer in that little meeting that we had, and I thought that it was going to be, I knew there was going to be some manual work involved, but not the work that I thought I had signed up for.
Yeah.
Because it was literally going to the Masjid, twice a week, emptying the donation boxes out, counting the stuff, going to the bank, depositing the money, dealing with the zakat applications, which was a separate.
Oh, that's a whole.
Yeah.
That's another episode, actually.
And then answering emails. I mean, I probably spend 20 hours a week answering emails in the Masjid, counting money, zakat applications, all that stuff. I didn't understand the amount of time that it was going to take to do that job. Right. And I'd spoken to you about it, but that I had no mental capacity to do anything else. My thing was just keeping the daily stuff.
Just keeping it afloat is.
Oh yeah, I'll even mention one other thing is that the last Ramadan that I have as a board member, because Ramadan was such a big time for donations and everything.
Yeah.
I think that for the first 20 days of Tarawih, I didn't pray a single Tarawih at the Masjid because I was in the office from after Isha prayer until like 10 rakahs of Tarawih. Emptying the boxes out, counting the money, because it had to be emptied out every single night, because that's how many donations you couldn't leave it, because I think one day I left like 2 days in a row and the box is overflowing. I mean, it's a good problem, but it's a lot of manual labor to count.
Something that people don't realize is like you're at the masjid,
Oh yeah,
serving the board, and you like literally can't pray.
yeah. That's yeah.
I mean, it's similar to like, people having to sacrifice attending the khutbah to like manage parking.
Yes.
Or
Or a security member or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
I think that's an underappreciated part is that it is very easy to be critical, but but there are day-to-day things that you have to do to keep the masjid running that do require a lot of sacrifice.
Yeah.
People don't see. What was you mentioned burnout? Any other challenges that you faced?
So if you're familiar with our community, we had an issue where there's a masjid building project that we were on. The masjid was building a new masjid, a few miles away. When we came on the board, we found out that there were some inaccuracies. There were some shortcuts that the builder was doing to build the property that wasn't up to the spec of what we had of what the original board had kind of mapped out. There was a lot of oversight, if you will, or there was a lot of they missed a lot of steps on the way. We kind of uncovered a lot of that stuff, and we had the difficult decision to start over from scratch. So essentially, we had fundraised for X amount of money on the project. We raised, a certain amount, and we had to trash the entire project because structurally the project wasn't.
It's like money was raised, money was spent, work was done, and now you have to redo it.
Yes. So bringing that to the community and making that decision and telling the community of what our findings, because literally nothing can be built on that structure because the foundation was not sound. Mm-hmm. So telling the community that we had to go through that was an immense struggle that affected a lot of donors that had donated to the masjid, because now there's an immediate distrust to the board.
Yeah, they feel like, what are you doing with my,
Exactly. So we had to bring in independent structural engineers to essentially tell them that structurally it wasn't sound. So that was a very difficult part of the of a board, and this is on top of the money counting and a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah. This is
in addition to that. And then I would say number two is that not only that, we actually had a legal battle with the existing builder. And we had to go through that process and just the sheer amount of meetings we had with lawyers and trying to recoup the money that we had spent on the property was a huge challenge that we faced. So those are that was, I mean, as far as what we did as far as a board, that defined it, was that masjid project. And essentially telling the community we had to start over from scratch, and then regaining the trust of the community to have new plans and do everything over was a huge difficulty that we had.
I think for me, so we didn't have anything at that magnitude. I think our challenges were more around kind of like what I mentioned, like the different agendas. Mm-hmm. But I think the biggest challenge for me was the interpersonal dynamics on the board. Okay. Quote unquote community politics, that type of thing. And that's something, again, like I've, grew up seeing it. I know how it works. I know how it's played. But being on the inside is a completely different view. Mm. And that's when, you really start to see things like if there's 7 people on the board and a certain agenda item needs a majority, I went in with an expectation that we're going to sit, we're going to put this issue on the table, we're going to debate it, mm-hmm. We're going to air out everyone's points of view, and then we're based on the information presented, we will, take a vote. Mm-hmm. And so I have enough confidence that, let's say if, me and 2 other people are advocating for something and 4 people are not, on a particular issue, I feel confident that I could persuade or, get some people to change their mind. Okay. Right, on a certain issue. But what I found happening instead was the power play, where 4 people would get together, they would just make an agreement without talking to the other people, show up, and then all of a sudden the first agenda items were just taking a vote on this issue, no discussion. Wow. Boom, vote's done. There's no room to talk. Yeah. There's no room to say anything. Similar thing happened to me when I was not on the board, and the board at that time had brought me in as the community member. So they had an imam search committee that had like, 2 board members, this person, and a quote unquote community member, and I was the community member. And then what ended up happening was the person leading it essentially wanted a particular type of imam that, for lack of a better term, is power dynamics. They wanted someone that they could control.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to outshine the board, so to speak. And so when I was bringing in like good quality candidates, same thing. They just basically stopped talking to me and made the vote with the other 3 and just kind of ignored me, right?
Wow.
Like ghosted.
Yeah.
That's the millennial term,
Yeah.
but that's before it was a term, getting ghosted. So there's the power plays and the politics is completely different. It's also things like you can have one-on-one conversations with a board member, like a fellow board member, and they'll say, oh, yeah, we agree with you completely. When this issue comes up for vote, yeah, definitely we're backing you, et cetera, et cetera. So you walk into the meeting thinking, okay, like we're ready to go on this. And then all those people are just quiet.
Wow.
And don't say anything. And like, people that said, yeah, we're going to back you up in the meeting, then don't say anything during the meeting, right? So there's lots of little things like that. And I know that someone listening will be like, well, what's the big deal? This is just how things work.
Yeah.
Kind of grow, put your big boy pants on and get over it type of thing. But the reason that I'm mentioning that is because when you are making decisions like who do we hire as an imam or who do we hire as a youth director, what type of events are we putting on, who's teaching classes, these are things that have a very direct impact on the spiritual development of the community.
Yeah.
And if there's not a sound decision-making process in place, and that doesn't mean that who I pick is the right person or the way that I want to do things is the right way, but there has to be a proper vetting of that decision. If
there has to be shura. There has to be counsel.
Exactly. If there's not a proper shura process, then the decision-making is broken. Yeah. And that for me was the most like mentally exhausting part of it.
Yeah. I mean, so for us, it was. I mean, this is not to say that you didn't want your way on certain things, but for us, I mean, as a board member, I wanted my way on certain things, and after the whole conversation, I heard everyone's point of view, and we had healthy discussions about certain things. If my thing wasn't chosen, then it was okay because
you got to air your point of view,
exactly,
and it was heard and assessed
exactly. Yeah. But that's very difficult if that was wow.
And that's a major cultural issue, right? Is the shura part of it. And so for me, this always brings up that question of, okay, well, people make this an either or. Either you're on the sidelines criticizing or you're, part of the solution. Like you're inside and getting things done. And I don't think that that's a true statement or a true assertion. I think there's a lot of limitations as to what someone can do even from within. Yeah, depending on community dynamics.
Yes.
It's not always as easy as like, well, just get on the board and then you can change things. Like, no, sometimes you can't because there's a culture there that makes it difficult. Yeah. A lot of times, and I don't know if your experience with this, but my conclusion basically was boards will serve their own self-interest, not as a group, but as individuals. Unless the larger community holds them accountable. And what I've seen in a lot of places is there's just too much apathy from the general community. And so when the general community doesn't care, that's what empowers people to do crazy things as board members. Yeah. I don't know. Any thoughts on that? Or maybe seen differently. I don't know. That's, again, my limited observation.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it was kind of the entire community was kind of zoned in on building the masjid, and so
you had like the one major issue.
Yeah, we had the one major issue, and so once the entire community was kind of convinced that what had happened was not sound, and we had to kind of re-go from scratch. There was a lot of. And not to say there wasn't differences, but there was a lot of unity in the community that, hey, here's our path forward. Yeah. And so we didn't have that luxury of having free time to kind of do all this other stuff, if you will. I mean, we still held programs. I mean, you were part of our barbecue, cook-off that we had.
I'll take credit for being part of the barbecue.
Yes. I mean, you were a judge,
Yes.
you and some other people. But we did other events. We didn't let the construction thing stop us. But I think my experience was that once the community was kind of the difficulty kind of united the community, if you will.
Yeah.
As strange enough as that is, that difficulty kind of united the community and had us have a path forward.
And I think one thing that we should mention, because this type of an issue, it's big enough that it could tear a community completely apart.
Yes.
This is the type of thing that would result, instead of your one big construction project, it could very easily have turned into, forget this construction project, we're all splitting up and starting 3 different masjids.
Yes.
Like that. I'm sure that has happened in other places. We know of those types of things.
Oh yeah.
But one thing that I want to point out, and this kind of goes to that quality of having strong leadership in the community. I think one part of, and you can correct me here, but one part of getting the buy-in from the larger community was strong leadership, particularly from, like imams at your masjid.
Yes. Yeah, because I mean, think about it from their perspective too. I mean, they put their necks on the line. They fundraised for the project, 3-4 years ago, and for them, for
they
us,
have a lot of their own credibility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so for us to tell them, hey, the thing you fundraised for is essentially not going to work because there was a lot of oversight with the builder or whatever. Once we had that conversation, it was a difficult theme for them.
And that's probably more difficult than the community because an imam is going to say, like, look, I don't know how to manage a construction project. You guys are supposed to do that. I took your word for it, and now you're telling me that you guys screwed it up.
Yeah. Yep. So from our perspective, the minute that we found out there were things wrong, we contacted the imam and we said, hey, here's exactly what's going on. He had a discussion with the engineer that we had hired to kind of uncover all the things.
Yeah.
Once he was kind of convinced and on board, then he kind of, and having that imam present in all the meetings that we had with the general body,
right,
to kind of uncover these issues or to tell all the issues of the community was very helpful.
Yeah.
Because the imam there, I mean, everyone respected the imam, and the imam didn't speak for a lot of times, but then when it came time for him to speak, he was like, this is how it's going to be.
So let me ask you something. Was there ever any sentiment? Because I'm thinking of other places where something like this could happen, and if I was to predict their next action, 99 times out of 100, I would assume that if they uncover this type of an issue, they would simply cover it up and not tell the community. Because I have myself seen situations where on to put the proportion in perspective, on like a $1.2 million project, 300 or 400K go unaccounted for.
Wow.
Right? Which is a very large, maybe budget-wise compared to like a mega masjid, 300-400K is not that large, but on a $1.2 million project, you're talking, 20-30% of the budget.
Yeah.
But it goes unaccounted for. And sometimes because the person in charge of those funds has high social standing, people aren't going to question it too much, right? Mm-hmm. And they can kind of get away with fudging things and doing whatever. So did you ever see a sentiment of saying like, hey, let's just not quote unquote create fitna in the community, let's keep this in-house and try to fix it? What made you instead say like, no, we have to be transparent and take this back?
That kind of goes with the people that we had on the board. There were a lot of younger, and this is not to say that older people can't make these decisions, whatever. But
we're older now.
Yeah. But it was that we kind of, I mean, because you're talking about a foundation of a building, and the person who assessed the foundation said this thing could collapse in 2 to 3 years, and if that happened, I mean, there's no way we could live with ourselves that hey, we were responsible for.
Yeah, I mean, anyone even gets hurt.
Yeah, then the liability is on us. Yeah. I mean, not to say that if it was anything minor, then we would have covered up.
Right.
But we made it a point to be as transparent as possible. There were some things that we had to kind of do before we got community approval. But I remember one criticism of us is that we used to put everything to a vote with the community, whether to trash the project or whether to there was even a situation where we had if we were going to move into another building or continue building this masjid, and we put that about the community. So we always erred on the side of having the community's input. Versus us taking. Now there's some things that
the community voted us to make these decisions. So
yeah, and there were some things where the community had to vote us, and they had to trust us. Where you had to hiring the lawyers to start the litigation process against the builder, or even the structural engineer that we hired, the independent one. These things we didn't take the community to say, hey, trust us. We're gonna make these assessments. But yeah, there's no sentiment where because it was just wasn't right. It wasn't what we were there to do.
Yeah.
Is to not uncover any of these things. And I mean, I remember even one thing from as being treasurer. I mean, I made it a point to even post P&Ls, the profit and loss statement, every single month at the masjid, which wasn't being done beforehand. Not to say anything wrong against the board or the treasurer was there. They didn't see that transparency. That
they didn't see a need for it.
They didn't see a need for it. But I made it a point to, hey, let's be even our finances. Let's be transparent. Where we had a loss in operations, where we had a loss with the expansion project, put these numbers on the board and let the community see it.
Yeah.
So we made that even that a policy.
I think one thing that gets understated is donated money is a huge amana.
Yes.
It's
Yep.
It's wasting like $5 there is a lot more difficult than $5 at home. Oh.
That's fine.
Yeah. We were told to pause recording because a beep was going to go off, but they don't realize that no one really cares about background noise on this podcast.
Nope.
But let's talk about community dynamics for a second.
Okay.
I'll share mine. And so one issue that we dealt with, and this will sound incredibly bizarre to people, was we had actually a very heavy, I don't say contingent, but there was a large number of people or influential people in the community that didn't want activities in the masjid, actually.
That's odd.
And so when there were things going on where teenagers were coming or young professionals were coming, in many cases driving in from other communities, there was a lot of regulars that didn't like that.
Really?
Because it disrupted their little kind of community club feel.
Yeah, okay.
And I know that this is not the norm. This is probably more isolated, but it is the dynamic that I dealt with personally. Yeah. And so there was pressure from the community that they didn't want to promote these types of activities. When there was... if the masjid was full because there was some kind of program going on, they were saying like, we don't want all these kids running around. They're making a mess. They're being loud. They're, doing this or doing that. They're whatever the case may be. But that's the dynamic that I had to deal with. And ultimately one of the reasons that, we mentioned again, I lasted 90 days. This is one of the reasons that I lasted 90 days was I realized very quickly that I was not going to be able to change the sentiment in the community.
Okay.
So it was one thing that if I could, maybe I could fight it out on the board and kind of get my way in a group of 7 people. Mm-hmm. But if we have a general body meeting and the majority of the general body is saying like, no, we don't want this type of thing. We don't want to bring an imam who's going to bring all these kids in here and make a mess and, whatever it was that they were saying is kind of irrelevant. But when I realized that was a general community sentiment, I was like, okay, there's nothing left for me to do here.
Wow.
I can't change it from the inside or the outside.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my dad because my dad was one of the people who was really pushing me like, no, you need to get on the board. You have to get involved. You have to, fight the good fight, so to speak. And I was just like, I think I'm done. There's nothing left for me to do. And my dad basically said, he said, okay, just make sure you get your 90 days in and then you can write an article on the internet about it.
You know what a weird community dynamic for me was, and again, this is not probably typical with everyone, but if anyone doesn't know who I am, I mean, my mother is Italian. She lived the majority of her life as a Christian. She converted to Islam maybe 10 years ago. My father's from Pakistan, Karachi, speaks Urdu, but I never grew up speaking Urdu, and we never spoke Urdu in the house. I never learned Urdu. I can, understand a conversation if you sprinkle some English in there, but I never spoke Urdu, don't understand it. So I never really clicked with the Desi crowd, if you will, at the Masjid. So one weird dynamic that I had was I never clicked with that Desi crowd, and they would always complain in Urdu to other people about the finances and this and that, but they would never complain to me about it. Or if they had an issue with, a tax receipt or whatever like that, they would complain to other people about it.
But they wouldn't come to you.
But they wouldn't come to me. And whenever they came to me and say, hey, I'll fix your issue, I'll fix the receipt or whatever, or, whatever was happened in the past, we'll take care of it. But they were never like really upfront with me as far as how they really felt. And I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but I never really melded with that.
So it wasn't really a sense of them not wanting to like offend you. It's just they didn't think that they could connect with you.
Exactly. Which was it was kind of weird because I guess it was good because I never really got asked the difficult questions as far as the construction.
You didn't get random people just coming up to you one-on-one and parading you and
yeah. Because when they saw me, they thought that I was a convert, number one, and
oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And they didn't want to offend me, if you will, and
they didn't want to offend the white guy.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So that was a weird dynamic that I had was I never really merged in with the uncle crowd, if you will.
Yeah.
So.
But you've dealt more with another dynamic that I wanted to talk about, which is the I don't want to say overly conservative, but there is a dynamic in our communities where there is a lot of strictness around how they think the masjid should be, who should be coming to the masjid. And when I say who should be coming, I mean that they're very strict on how genders are segregated, on children being in a separate area. There's a lot of, and everyone kind of fill in the gaps, but there's a lot of, they're very particular about how the environment should be and how things should be done.
Yeah.
How did you deal with that?
So a lot of the times the imam would kind of deal with that stuff because, the imam had the trust of the community, and the imam was, I don't want to say forward thinking, but the imam kind of had balanced approach on how to deal with these things. But I would say not to appease them, but like one thing that we were really strict about was like in Ramadan for the Qiyam sessions. Like when it was like the 4 to 5 a.m., like we'd have a schedule, from 12 a.m. to 5 a.m. would be like the last 10 nights of Ramadan would be like this program. So like from 12 to 2 would be like a talk or whatever like that. And we would dedicate like from 3 to 4 a.m. would be like a prayer time. Like we would a Qiyam at the Masjid. And even our imam was like, at this time from 3 to 4 a.m., like if your kid is not with you, like praying beside you, then your kid does not even need to be in the next room playing.
Yeah,
like,
at 3 a.m.
At 3 a.m. It doesn't serve any purpose. So I think having that, and when that community kind of saw that, that the imam was willing to at this time just give the community,
and that's also like a common sense approach, right? Like the masjid environment at 3 a.m. in the last nights of Ramadan, is much different from Isha prayer.
Yes, and if you've been to our Masjid Isha prayer, it's like kids are in the next room playing, and the imam doesn't say two words about that.
Yeah, because it's expected at that point. It's
expected, but I think when they saw that, they kind of trusted the imam knew what they were doing as far as they're not going to be like liberal, not liberal all the time, but just have the kids run.
It's not going to be a free for all 24/7.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was kind of shocked to see that too, because I've always thought of the imam as being a hands-off type person, but then when he was like, okay, when
it was time to be strict, it was
time to be strict.
Got it.
So that helped out.
So that is the balance. It's just knowing your situation and timing and setting.
Exactly.
So I got a couple of questions left here. What were the positives of serving on the board? What did you like about it?
To realize that I'm never going to run the board again. I think a positive, like I think you alluded to this earlier, was the whole like our construction debacle that happened could have really broken a community and could have broken even the board. but the leadership that we had in the board itself, I respect a lot because they kept us afloat. And they kept us on the same page and led us through this process. Because I even spoke to a number of people afterwards, and they said, "Yeah, what y'all been through, this has broken other communities." So that was a positive that I really saw positive leadership on a board, and I don't know if that's been even said before, but it was positive leadership on the board that we it was difficult.
Yeah, it's a hard storm to weather.
It was a hard storm to weather, but I still have connections with those people to this day because that bond was formed, and I respect their leadership because they led us through that very difficult process.
Yeah.
So that was a positive that I took away from it. What about you? If there were any positives.
I mean, there's always positives, right?
Yeah.
I think for me it was, appreciation for like the little things that have to be done day to day.
Yep.
Just to keep the doors open, keep the place running. And this is beyond like, paying the electricity bill on time. Like, it's beyond stuff like that. There's so many things that get referred to you that open your eyes as to what's happening in a community. And so I think for me a positive was just being able, not that I like did a bunch of good work, but just seeing work at least others were doing, or things that are touching the Masjid institution that the general community is not aware of, right? So there's situations where, again, people are coming in for like zakat, or people are coming in for financial help, and someone being there to actually help them is, it's a needed service.
Yeah.
There are situations where people are coming and they just need to connect with a mosque, people from other faiths. And it's not always just interfaith.
Yeah.
There's sometimes random people just coming in being like, hey, I just want to learn about Islam. I know that and I was at a smaller masjid, so I know bigger masajid have institutions and policies, they have a well-oiled machine, but a lot of smaller communities don't. And a lot of times these things fall onto a handful of those 4 or 5 people.
Yeah.
I remember one request, and this is when I was not on the board, but the board had reached out to me to figure out if we could help. But a prisoner had somehow found the masjid's address and written them a letter saying, I'm in XYZ prison, I just converted to Islam, I need books.
Wow.
And, he had somehow found that masjid's address. So the masjid got some money together, bought a bunch of books, and, sent it over to that individual. But, there's so many little things like that the average community member would never hear about.
Yeah.
Or never know about. And so there's a lot of opportunity to do that work. I think for me the challenge really is like whether people can stay focused on the work or whether all the other noise and politics gets in the way.
Yeah.
That's kind of where the rubber hits the road, so to speak.
Yeah.
Is situations aren't going to be perfect, but if you can do more work than politics, then it's a worthwhile sacrifice, and sometimes you have to put up with it. But I think in situations where the ratio is the other way, that's when maybe you find a different way to make your contribution.
Yeah. That's good.
I think that actually might be a decent spot to end this podcast here. Any last comments, things you want to share? How about advice to people who are considering running for their board, or people who are fed up with their local institutions? I
mean, I would say just get involved, and like you said, make sure like a very important aspect of your board tenure, and just like you don't want anyone else to come into a meeting have preconceived notions as far as what they are going to decide or whatever like that, or you don't do the same, like you don't shut down conversations or whatever. Always have an open mind. But I also will say is that number one, get approval from your spouse first before actually running for a board, because it
takes a lot of family time away.
Yeah,
it's a huge sacrifice. That was actually the part that I wasn't expecting, was how much time is spent in these dumb meetings that don't accomplish anything, and you're stuck. You're away from everything.
Yeah, and in our situation, we didn't have kids at the time, and I could. It was easier for me to have that conversation and kind of be away for all those meetings.
Yeah.
But alhamdulillah, we had a first child after my board tenure was over, and I now I'm just looking back at it. I can't even imagine myself pulling myself away for that amount of time to do that. I would have resigned before I did that. But I mean, just understand the time.
And that was, I mean, quite honestly, that was my calculus as well, right? Was, okay, I've been in it for X amount of time. Have I actually been able to accomplish enough to justify that time sacrifice? And I felt like I hadn't.
Yeah, and I would say the second, the other thing, and other devices is just, while you're on the board, is don't lose yourself. Don't lose your spirituality. It's very hard, or it's very easy to lose your spirituality, but have something firm within you that will keep that spirituality going, whether it's your own personal tahajjud or your own lectures that you listen to or whatever, because it's very easy to be a board member and to not attend the masjid for prayers or whatever, because it
becomes mentally taxing.
It's mentally taxing. Maintain that spirituality.
My advice would be, I think it's termed like the pocket of excellence.
Okay.
Which is, and I think this applies whether you're on the board or not, right? So whether you're on the board or you're in a community where you want to do more, but there's maybe not opportunities for you to do as much, is pick one thing that's small and just own it. Maybe it's teaching at Sunday school, but just be like the best Sunday school teacher. And eventually, even if there's, let's say the community, there's people on the board that don't want you to get involved. Like, at a certain point, they'll have to respect the good quality of work that you're doing, even in that one arena, and be forced to recognize it. Okay. And, it opens up opportunities for you to do more and make more change in the community. But it's, it's a long game.
Yeah, it is. It is.
It's difficult.
Cool.
All right. Any, plug anything, your Instagram account at Adam Taufique.
There's nothing to see. There's nothing to see on my Instagram. I don't think I've posted anything on my Instagram for a while. So,
all right, guys. Jazakallah khair for listening. Please make sure you rate, review, subscribe, share the episode, all that good stuff, and we'll see you at the next episode.